We're in the thick of things in the NHL playoffs right now, but that doesn't mean the NHL rumor mill is done. In fact, it's the exact opposite. And Frank Seravalli of Daily Faceoff released his top 20 trade targets for the NHL offseason, and some of these are juicy. But who are the biggest players available in this year's NHL offseason, and which huge NHL superstars will be traded? Watch till the end for all the trade rumors and all the breakdown, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for daily hockey content just like this. You won't want to miss it. Now, I told you guys there was going to be some spice in this article, but here it is by Frank Seravalli, trade targets for the top 20 in the offseason. And starting off, Erik Karlsson's value may never be higher for the San Jose Sharks, and we're going to be getting into this in a second, but usually with these trade target articles, there's a few very solid guys, maybe a couple of really good players, but no, there's some really interesting names here that we could see being dealt in just a couple of months' time. Now, Frank Seravalli first mentions that back in the trade deadline when they released a top 50 trade targets, 42 of those players end up being dealt. Now, what's super interesting here is that he mentions a weak free agent class this offseason, as well as a substantial salary cap increase could infuse a lot of different trades and a lot of action in this year's offseason. And lo and behold, first place in the trade target list for the offseason is Erik Karlsson of the San Jose Sharks, and you can see 4 more seasons at $11.5 million, which is a big reason why we didn't see the trade materialize at the NHL trade deadline, but why it's a lot more likely that we'd see an offseason deal involving EK. As you can see in 82 games, 101 points, one of the best offensive defensemen of this generation. There's still going to be a lot of interest there, as there was in the trade deadline, even with a lot less likelihood of a trade actually happening. But with Frank Seravalli, he mentioned the last time a Norris Trophy winner had been traded in the same summer was Doug Harvey back in 1961. An extremely rare occurrence, but we're likely to see it happen this year. And Frank Seravalli mentions that Mike Grier acknowledged the locker cleanout for the Sharks that he's again ready to listen in on Erik Karlsson offers, and because of that big retained salary, it's much more likely to happen in this year's NHL offseason, but saying how the price is as high as it'll ever be, and this is really the one shot for the Sharks to get out of that Erik Karlsson contract. The time is now, and I don't see the Sharks really hiding away from that opportunity. Next up at number 2 in the trade bait board is Kevin Hayes of the Philadelphia Flyers. He was all over the place in rumors this last trade deadline and really throughout the year. There was the rumors that he could get waived in the middle of the season, but we see him coming in at number 2, 54 points in 81 games, a couple of scratches here by John Tortorella, but offensively can still put in a lot, even though I definitely think he's probably the most overrated player out there. Now we see here that GM for the Flyers, Danny Briere, acknowledged that some players simply aren't fit for the Flyers, either through timeline or with John Tortorella or both. Kevin Hayes makes sense. He'd fit that bill. Now, Frank Seravalli also mentions there is definitely interest around the deadline. The Hurricanes, Stars, Wild, Red Wings, and Blue Jackets were among those kicking tires. He'd be an ideal fit for his hometown Bruins. The Flyers seemed willing to retain salary if need be and expect them to facilitate a deal on Kevin Hayes. So a lot of interest already in the trade deadline. We don't know whether that was serious interest or whether obviously teams were just checking in, but at the very least, there was a multitude of teams there looking in around the trade deadline, when of course those type of contracts are way harder to bring on. So an off-season type of deal made a lot more sense for Kevin Hayes, just like Erik Karlsson, and I agree that we're very likely to see it. Now, if I'm a team, unless I'm getting him for practically free, I'm not touching him with a 10-foot pole with that contract, with just the work ethic that he has on the ice. I would absolutely never be interested in a type of player like that, but he can still produce at times, and teams will still be after him. Next up at number 3 is a super interesting one. Samuel Girard making $5 million for the next 4 seasons. He's on the block with the Avs. Now, Frank Seravalli mentions that the Avs will have $13 million in cap space this summer, but will need to sign upwards of 9 players with that cash, and Girard would be the odd man out on the back end, which makes a ton of sense. But he's an expendable asset for the Avs. Even if he's had a much better year this season, he's the type of player that, with the current Avs cap situation, is a player that just can't really keep long term, but that AAV at $5 million being relatively low for a top 4 D who's extremely mobile, I can see a lot of teams going after that and being comfortable with just bringing that contract on, not even any salary retention, which for the Avs would be humongous for them. But I see this as a really likely offseason deal. Now, going on to one of the biggest bombshells of this article, for the 4th trade target, Frank Seravalli lists Elias Lindholm. Of course, with one more season at a $4.85 million AAV, it is kind of interesting. Calgary might not be able to re-sign him. And the start of this is really interesting. This was always going to be a big summer for Lindholm in determining his future in Cowtown. He sprinkled a little spicy seasoning on that as the Flames packed up, hesitating in a big way when asked whether he would be interested in re-signing. It's believed Lindholm is one of at least a handful of players who did not see eye to eye with coach Daryl Sutter. There is still a lot to be determined. Is Sutter officially returning as Flames coach? Who will be the next Calgary GM? And if he isn't willing to re-sign, is Calgary willing to enter the season without an extension? There would be huge interest in Lindholm, an uber-talented Selke Trophy candidate on a bargain contract for one more year. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, not even just the Daryl Sutter stuff, but just, of course, with the way the team is structured right now, they got a lot of big contracts and a lot of big long-term contracts. And Lindholm is going to get a healthy raise, at least in the $7 million range, I would assume. And for the Flames, adding another player like that will be extremely hard to do. Now, that next offseason, that 2024 offseason when Lindholm is up is going to be intense. Even besides Elias Lindholm, they got 3 players on the defense, 3 major pieces who are going to be free agents in Zadorov, Hanifin, and Tanev. They also got in the forward group even besides Lindholm. You got Toffoli, you got also Dylan Dubé as an RFA, and then you got, of course, Mikael Backlund, who's going to be off his deal. So that offseason is going to be crazy, even if they were to trade Lindholm. But this is the type of player that obviously you want to keep if you're Calgary. But there's going to be a lot of turnover here, a lot of potential players leaving. Lindholm might be a part of that. Now, at number 5 here is JT Miller, and it's interesting. He goes through all, of course, the Pittsburgh deal that didn't go through, and if that might happen again, and of course, how the Canucks might push to move him before the no trade clause kicks on in July 1st. But I just have a feeling that the Canucks aren't going to end up trading for him. It feels like the front office is kind of fine with keeping him on for now. So I don't know if I quite believe having him this high. But going on to a player that I think makes a lot more sense on this list, at number 6, in Evgeny Kuznetsov, who makes $7.8 million for the next 2 seasons. Absolutely brutal, especially with only a 55-point, 12-goal campaign in 2023. And you could see what Frank Seravalli is talking about. Kuznetsov is among the most intriguing players on the board. His off-ice conduct is well documented. His consistency and compete have been in question. But he's flat out one of the most talented players in the league. No one would blink if Kuznetsov bounced back with another point per game type season next year. His name circulated in trade rumors in 2021, and he netted 78 points in 79 games the next season. Because he may also be slowing down, as evidenced by his drop in production, his contract likely will not be easy to move. Trading Kuznetsov would remove most of the veteran Russians in Alex Ovechkin's lineup and leave him without a primary feeder on the power play. The Caps are expected to explore a multitude of options. And it is true, again, that playmaking ability is still there, even if it is inconsistent, but it would change a lot of that Caps squad. And again, $7.8 million, if he doesn't bounce back, that's a heavy contract to take on. And here we go at number 7, Pierre-Luc Dubois of the Winnipeg Jets. Frank Seravalli mentions how it's a massive summer for them and a team in transition, likely to turn the page from the Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler core officially to Nikolai Ehlers and Kyle Connor. Will Dubois be part of that? He fits the age scheme. He would fill a huge void if Scheifele is gone, but it doesn't seem like Winnipeg necessarily fits him. Notably, he did not sign a long-term extension with the Jets last summer, and many speculated on comments made by his agent that were blown out of proportion that he could one day play for the Canadiens, which I don't know if it's blown out of proportion. There seems to be a lot of fuel to that fire. Nonetheless, Dubois needs a new deal, and this is where the rubber meets the road, or better yet, where the pen meets the paper. We'll see. So again, more talk on Dubois. He's not going to be staying in Winnipeg. It just feels like there's just too much of that. I just can't see it happening right now. Now, interesting, at number 8, he just says one St. Louis defenseman, Colton Parayko, Justin Falk, Nick Leddy, and Marco Scandella. So it seems like, again, we've seen reports as well that St. Louis is maybe going to have a little bit of turnover this offseason. That adds to that as well. Now, a super interesting name here coming in at number 9 is Ross Colton of the Tampa Bay Lightning, of course, being a pending RFA, 32 points in 81 games. Colton is due for a massive raise, and it doesn't appear that the Lightning have room to pay him. The late-blooming 4th-round pick who made a dent during Tampa's 2021 Stanley Cup run also has to cash in. His career earnings total $2.9 million. This is his prime earning time, so a hometown discount likely isn't in order. Colton has arbitration rights and has established himself as an 18 to 20 goal scorer who can be a consistent contributor on a contending team's third line. That will make him in demand for teams who think he could elevate in their lineup. Even if Alex Killorn walks in free agency, Tampa will have less than $10 million to spend to fill out their 8 remaining roster spots, and we'll also have to pay Tanner Jeannot. So really interesting there. Again, another team that will likely see some pretty big turnover this offseason just because of cap reasons. Ross Colton alongside a player like Alex Killorn might be a part of that. It would be brutal for Tampa Bay, but it does make sense. Now, this one is actually wild. At number 10 is Taylor Hall of the Boston Bruins. $6 million AAV for the next 2 seasons. And he says this: Hall has been magnificent for the Bruins in the first round series against the Panthers, so it's easy to understand why this feels like a reach. However, cap friendly would indicate Hall's cap hit is a luxury the Bruins cannot afford. The complicating factor for Boston is the $4.5 million salary cap overage that will be placed on next year's books by virtue of the Bergeron and Krejci earned performance bonuses. So whatever next year's cap ends up being, take $4.5 million off the top. Then factor in that they'll need to sign nearly half of their roster and might try to keep a trade acquisition like Tyler Bertuzzi, and the dollars get stretched thin in a hurry. Hall has been a playoff beast, but his production at that cap hit is less than ideal. He has a 10-team no-trade list. So really interesting on the Taylor Hall front. I mean, of course, we have seen how he has been dominant in this year's playoffs, and I think, honestly, that might change things more than Frank is letting on here. I just think that playoff performance might honestly take him off the list and might just have Boston maybe give away Tyler Bertuzzi in free agency, perhaps. We'll see what ends up happening. The Bruins are going to have another heavy offseason as they look to maybe rebuild that core of Krejci and Bergeron are gone. Taylor Hall, I'm not sure if they're going to be willing to give up so easy. But going on to a player that will likely be gone very easily in Adam Henrique of the Anaheim Ducks. Maybe not because of the cap hit, but also the player at hand can still be pretty good. You can see 22 goals in 62 games. He has at one more season, $5.8 million cap hit, but I'm assuming the Anaheim Ducks will be more than happy to retain some salary on that. If not for an untimely injury before the trade deadline, it's likely Henrique's tenure with the Ducks would have ended in February. Even with the injury, there were a couple of teams hovering around Henrique on deadline day to see if they could prime out of Anaheim. Outside of Cam Fowler, Henrique is Pat Verbeek's easiest and most valuable veteran to move. He plays a responsible game, rarely gets himself in trouble on the ice, and can reliably post a 20-goal season. If he does get moved this summer, he'll be another top trade deadline chip in 2024. And it's absolutely true. I mean, obviously, he'd be a rental next year if he doesn't get dealt at the offseason, but I could absolutely see it. The only thing that really keeps that from happening, again, is maybe the injuries, and maybe if that is an issue for teams, especially at his age at 33. But when he is on the ice, he's proven to be effective, and maybe in a power play 5-on-5 role, goal scoring wise, he can do a lot for maybe a contending third line, perhaps. But again, there would have to be some heavy salary retention there. Now, interesting at number 12, Frank Seravalli lists Tyler Myers, and it's interesting. Keep an eye on the $5 million signing bonus due. The belief is Myers' bonus is due to be paid in September, shortly before training camp, which would leave him with just $1 million in salary to be paid after that during the course of the regular season. For any team interested acquiring team, there's little incentive to pick up that tab when you know the Canucks are on the hook for it. That means a trade could come together shortly after it's paid, though it also makes him a heck of a deadline commodity. That will be interesting to keep an eye on. At number 13, Frank Seravalli lists Sean Walker, one more season at $2.65 million AAV, and he says you can write it in a Sharpie and underline it. The LA Kings are 100% absolutely guaranteed to trade a riot shooting defenseman this summer. They have too many. One GM called LA the NHL's right shot defenseman bullpen. Their lineup balance is off as a result of the glut, and it's blocked a path to some of their NHL Jordan Spence and forced other player Sean Durzi to play on their offhand side. Add in the fact that Walker was a healthy scratch for 4 of the Kings' first 5 postseason games this spring, and it's easy to see why he might be the one to go. That just makes sense. But I also have a feeling that Sean Durzi is going to be a part of that. He's been brutal in these playoffs, and again, not even just Jordan Spence, but even maybe a player like Brant Clark coming up. The Kings need to make room, and I could see them trading 2 D-man this offseason. Now, going on to more depth D, at 14 is Matt Grzelcyk of the Boston Bruins, who was like their 7th defenseman this year, still got 26 points in 75 games, which is the most disgusting thing in friggin' NHL history. But it's kind of the same thing as Sean Walker, where, again, that cap hit is a lot to bear, $3.69 million. And again, the Boston Bruins need as many cap savings as possible. That makes a lot more sense to me than trading Hall personally. Now, a couple interesting names here. Alec Martinez and Kaylee Yamamoto of the Golden Knights and the Oilers, respectively. For the Knights, they have one more season on his deal at $5.25 million, and says that that third year was always going to be painful for the Golden Knights, and it makes sense why there might be a move there. I think Martinez has played fine this year, and when healthy has been pretty solid, especially at age 35, but it would make sense for the Golden Knights to potentially move him, especially if they're going to go for bigger moves this offseason as well. You got Kelly Remoto at 16, which also makes sense. $3.1 million AAV for another year, which just doesn't make a lot of sense for his position in the Oilers system, and especially with how he's played in the playoffs, just has been a non-factor. He's likely to be dealt as well, just like Puljujarvi was. Now, interestingly, at number 17, Mikael Granlund, who is one of the worst trade deadline acquisitions we have seen, maybe besides Jeannot so far, but trading a second-round pick for, like 4 points in 19 games or whatever it was with Pittsburgh is just hilarious. But you can see he has $5 million in the AAV for the next 2 seasons. For a team that is as cap-strapped as Pittsburgh is, to bring on a contract like that, again, is just hilarious. But he says the Granlund trade was one of the moves that helped put the nail in the coffin on Ron Hextall's tenure in Pittsburgh. One way to describe his stay in the Steel City is disastrous. Granlund scored a grand total of 1 goal in 21 games, and the Pens missed the playoffs. To be fair, that wasn't all on him, but he certainly didn't hold up his end of the bargain. Now, with 2 more years left in his deal, his contract will be one for the next GM to clean up, and it might involve the Penguins having to pay to move on from him. And that is just, again, amazing. Friggin' Ron Hextall, man. Next up at number 18, Frank Seravalli talks about Ivan Provorov, who has 2 more seasons on his deal at a $6.75 million cap hit. Talks about Provorov having frustrations with his situation and the Flyers having frustrations with his level of play, and asks, can he be a number 1 defenseman? No. And his stature in the league, and if that could come again. To me, with Ivan Provorov, he's one of those defensemen out there that is the number 1 D on a bad team that just gets the most excuses thrown out there. It's like, oh, he plays so much on this bad team, and that's why he's bad. But have you ever thought about maybe the player playing the most on the bad team is maybe a part of the reason for this team being bad? It adds up, and it's a type of situation where Provorov has not held his own and has not held his own side of the bargain on the contract. $6.75 million. He hasn't been up to that level throughout almost any part of this deal. And it's one of those situations where maybe it's like a Gavrikov situation where he's getting played too much, he's getting overplayed. It may be a second pair, maybe third pair role in a different team, in a contending team, that's better. And I would assume that's the same type of situation, maybe not to the same extreme, but at the same time, that $6.75 million cap hit, you're paying him to be a top 2D. I just don't know if he can be that right now, if at all. And then to end things off, you got a couple of interesting names. Logan Stanley of the Winnipeg Jets. We saw a ton of trade rumors surrounding him at the deadline. It was kind of interesting to see him not being traded. In 19 games, he got 3 points, and of course, 6'6" blue liner. He's bad. Don't trade for him. If you trade for him, you're bad, and you're going to be bad. That's all I got to say. The Jets want value to return for Stanley and don't have an interest in giving him away. Well, maybe they should because he's bad. I don't know why they try to keep him, but whatever. You got Kevin LeBanc at number 20 with the San Jose Sharks. 1 more season at a $4.725 million AAV. 33 points in 72 games. Strong defensive year out of LeBanc, but you can see that cap it might be a little bit much for teams to bring on closer to $5 million, which isn't exactly ideal. LeBanc finished the season on a bit of a hideout, posting 5 goals in an 11-game stretch in March and early April after what has been a mostly miserable couple of seasons. He seems pretty far removed from that 17-goal, 56-point campaign that put him back on the radar in 2019. There have been injuries and probably a loss of confidence. There's probably something worth trading for if the Sharks were willing to get creative. And to me, that's the type of player that I would be interested in bringing on. Again, defensively, he's gotten the job done in a lot of ways. And of course, had a couple of healthy scratches, a lot of drama with David Quinn. But to me, he's one of the better players still in the Sharks. And yes, that AAV is quite a bit, but maybe if you could have the Sharks retain $1 million, perhaps, I think it would be a player that a lot of teams would benefit from bringing on. But those are the top 20 trade targets from Frank Seravalli, and a lot of interesting names here being brought up. Let us know down below, what do you guys think of all these different names? Which ones do you guys see being traded? Which ones do you guys see actually being dealt in the offseason? Let us know down below. Of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell for more daily hockey content just like this. And of course, share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Get it to everyone so they can get updated on what the offseason might provide. And click on this card for all of our NHL trade rumor content right in one playlist. Thank you so much for watching, y'all, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.